Welcome to our 7 tips of evaluating place-based approaches. We're just giving a little grace minute at the start here as people enter in. Take this moment to stretch, to come into the session, do whatever last minute things that you need. We'll be starting very soon. We're very pleased that you're joining us. All right, fantastic. So welcome. My name's Ellise Barkley and I'm Clear Horizons Academy Manager, and I'll host the session today. I'd like to start with acknowledging that we gather on traditional land. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and beyond, and pay respects to elders past and present. I also extend respects to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and First Nations peoples here today. I'm on Darkinjung country, so I invite you to turn your attention to where you are on the traditional lands that you're on, and also to acknowledge that there's the unique cultural and spiritual relationship that's held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people on the land, the sky, the water and the seas that are in your place where you are. So by starting us here, and also when we centre First Nations perspectives and values and approaches into evaluation, we're better able to contribute to equity. So today's session is the first of a series, and Clear Horizons putting on a Ripples Effect series. And the purpose of these sessions is to bring interesting and experienced guests together to be able to talk about all things MEL. Now, MEL, I mean measurement, evaluation and learning as the little acronym, but often I'll say evaluation that covers that whole thing just for ease. So we're looking to be able to learn and share together from practice-led examples. So we hear all the time from our partners and academy learners that when you hear other people talk about how they do things and their tips and their real life examples, that can help our own practice and understanding. So that's the purpose of the session. We're trying a shorter format, so we'll see how that goes. It's 30 minutes in conversation and questions and answers at the end. So you're welcome to put in questions and comments using the question and answer function that you'll see. There's also a voting function that you can do there as well. And we're recording the session, so it can be a public resource for later, but we're really interested to hear your feedback after the session to see how it goes. So we've got 3 awesome guests today. Thanks very much for coming along. Each of our guests has a unique and deep experience working with place-based approaches, and also in the intersection of evaluating place-based approaches. So first up, I welcome Sharmay Brierley. So Sharmay is a proud Yuin woman, and she's project lead at Kowa, and she's really experienced in supporting First Nations peoples across human services sector, and she has a really strong people-centred approach. So welcome, Sharmay. We've got Rodney Green. He's an experienced practitioner and leader in community-led systems change and working with collaboration for impact. Prior, Rodney led Bernie Works, a place-based collective impact initiative that grew into becoming one of the national leaders in place-based approaches. And we've got Melinda Chiment. So Melinda specialises in community-based evaluation, participatory methods and strategic planning, and she's one of Clear Horizons' awesome principal consultants. So thanks, folks, for coming along. So we're talking about today evaluating place-based approaches, and we've been doing this for many years. And in terms of the evaluation field, we're still learning how to do it and refining our practice on it. Place-based approaches aim to centre the needs and aspirations of the community and the environment and the place where those strategies, solutions, initiatives are being run. And they're usually out to tackle big problems over a long period of time. They're much more complex than a usual program or a standalone program. And what's interesting about them is that they take a bit of a systems lens or a systemic approach, which means that they're not only looking to instigate benefits for the people or place, but they're also looking to nudge and shift some of those systems, conditions and patterns that hold those big issues in place. So there's lots of moving parts. There's lots of people involved, and it's a real test, try, learn approach. So there's no blueprint for how place-based approaches are done, and there's certainly no one size fits all for how to evaluate them. Each time we design, Mel, it's really context specific, it's unique. So the conversation is going to be sharing some tips from what's working and some of the bright spots that we're seeing in our practice. And Sharmay, I might start with you and invite you in. Feel free to add anything to the introduction that I had for you, but I'm really interested to hear, what are your tips for evaluating place-based approaches?
Thanks, Ellise. And I think you did great on the introduction. Thank you. My 2 tips for place-based evaluation is number 1 being in place, and then also centering community voice. So I think they kind of tie in with each other quite nicely, and they complement each other quite well. I thought I'd kind of just touch on the benefits of being in place and centering community voice before then running into a few examples of how you might do this in practice. So in terms of being in place, it's really beneficial because it allows us to observe and collect data that about what we're seeing, I guess, feeling and sensing while being present and grounded in community. And this is often data that's missed in standard qualitative data collection or even online qualitative data collection. So it really adds another layer to your findings. It also allows the evaluators to deepen their understanding of the local context, and make better informed and true assessments of the program or initiative's impact. It also provides insight into the social, cultural, and environmental factors that influence these outcomes. So, yeah, there's a whole other benefit to evaluation that can be explored just through being in place. The benefits of centering community voice is evaluation and data concerning Aboriginal people have often been deficit focused, misrepresenting and misrepresenting of our true experiences. So centering community voice really supports that truth telling and self-determination that we often talk about or we hear spoken about. And it also ensures that the narrative reflects the lived realities of the communities that we're working in or that the program or initiative is impacting. Through centering community voice, I guess it's not just in the evaluation findings either, so through data collection. I think it's also important to make sure that community voice is centered through the design and delivery of the evaluation itself. So community really hold the expertise and understand what's needed. And also they foster the relationships to support a successful evaluation. So I think that's also imperative there. Going into what this might look like. So being in place, obviously where possible, prioritizing face-to-face engagement over virtual. We think this is especially important at the beginning of a project, again, to support and building those relationships that are foundational and really essential to do evaluation the right way for community in a way that's beneficial and safe rather than being extractive. And it also supports in the rapport building. Ways that you can center community voice, I kind of touched on it before, but including community in the early stages of evaluation planning. You could also adopt a co-creation approach to the evaluation, actively involving the local community and end users of the project, the initiative or program that's being evaluated. That's also really helpful. So that might include testing an existing program logic model or co-creating one with community and end users, or conducting stakeholder mapping and developing the key evaluation questions together as a team. It's also, we've found at Kowa as well that it's useful to engage the same stakeholders throughout the evaluation process. So for example, it might be engaging them in the evaluation planning, but then re-engaging them to test your data collection methods and tools that you're using, just to ensure that they're appropriate and safe for those participating in data collection. It might be useful to engage them again to sense check the findings, making sure that what we've heard is correct and the way that we've interpreted it is also appropriate, and other important deliverables as well. So I do apologize, it was really quick to run through in the 5 minutes, but let me know if you've got any questions.
Well, I'm wondering about any examples that you're able to share, or what type of projects are you doing this in, and is there any real life examples that you can give?
I think so. So I myself work on a few, I guess, traditional evaluations. And as you kind of mentioned before, at Clear Horizon, you guys also focus on MEL. So we're trying to, I guess, adapt the MEL or UMEL. We also add the understanding component in the front of our practice. So trying to adopt that into all of our standard evaluations as well. And I guess it places a huge focus on the understanding component. Communities are constantly shifting and changing, and dynamics are changing as well. So it's important to make sure that you do hold those relationships with community, or at least your client does as well, to support a successful evaluation.
Awesome, thanks, Sharmay. I might invite Melinda in now, because I know that you also take a participatory focus on the way that you do things. So I was wondering what you might want to comment or build on from there, and also what's working for you in this space.
Well, thanks, Ellise, and thanks, Sharmay. I'm going to build off of your groundwork around the co-design piece and talk about it from an Our Town perspective. So hi, everyone. I'm Melinda. I'm a principal consultant here at Clear Horizon, and I work on the Our Town project. And I actually see some Our Towners in the meeting today, so feel free to jump in or roast me in the chat. For those unfamiliar with Our Town, it's a 10-year initiative in South Australia working with 6 regional towns to support community-led solutions for mental health and well-being. And as we're discovering, it's actually about so much more than that. It's a partnership between Clear Horizon, the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, Hi Lucy, and the Faye Fuller Foundation, and the 6 towns we work with. So I'm often invited to speak in spaces like this and share experiences about our town, which I'm always happy to do. I'm also acutely aware that our town is a bit of a unicorn in that it has long-term funding, a high trust funding partner, and a deep commitment to community-led approaches. So for example, when called, I often talk about trust building in community. But one thing we all know about trust building is that it takes time. And in our town, I have that luxury. I have the time to work alongside community. I have the time to stumble in front of or alongside community, to get back up with community. So I just want to name that. But prior to our town, I worked in the nonprofit sector for 15 years. So I'm acutely aware of the 6-month, the 12-month, the 18-month funding cycles. So when EB asked me to join today, I really thought about what insights and learnings I can pull from our town that might be applicable regardless of what timeframes or contexts you're working in. So here are my top 2 tips. The first one is to create and ground in a set of simple principles. So as EB mentioned, place-based work means working in and across complexity, different histories, different priorities, different agendas. So from the outset, needing something to ground and align everyone, whether you're grounding and aligning on purpose, vision, practice, evaluation. So from my experiencing, developing a set of principles can be a bit of a North Star as you navigate that complexity. So the principles don't tell us what to do, but they tell us how to go about doing it. In our town, we have 4 principles, and let me see if I can name them without looking at my notes. Community-led, modeling mentally healthy practice, learning our way through change, and seeing and acting in systems. So how I just recalled those short ones, it's because we have 4 and not 10. So better to have 4 simple principles that we're all going to remember and come around regularly than 10 that we're not going to use. In our town, these have kept us anchored, even when things felt uncertain. No matter your project scope or time frame, defining and committing to a shared set of principles can create clarity and cohesion in this complex work. So a couple examples of this, bringing these principles to life. In my early days, as I do, I came in hot to the Our Town project. I wanted to plan town visits. I wanted to offer learning sessions. I wanted people to come with me to conferences, all of which are great, and many were taken up. However, in those early days, I also learned a few things. First, I learned about seeding and harvest season, and what those seasons mean for communities in farming areas, what it means for their families, and what it means for folks' ability to engage in this work. I learned to slow down and move at the pace of community. Towns graciously led me and taught me how to walk alongside, and I learned along the way. Leaning into the principles of community-led and learning our way through change gave us permission to work differently in those early days. Which leads me to the second tip. I might shorten this up just because Sharmay spoke to it so beautifully, but it's around using co-design, co-creation, collaboration as a tool to build relationship and trust in place. Now, I don't need to explain to this room what I mean by evaluation baggage. You know that feeling you get when you walk into a room and you can just sense people thinking, oh, great, here comes the evaluator. Look, no matter how progressive your approach or how much we try and shift the narrative, we can't undo the stress and harm that evaluation has done and continues to do in certain contexts. So what can we do? I suggest that we create something together. Of course, co-design has many benefits beyond trust building. It leads to better impact. But putting that aside for a moment, there's power in coming to the table, visioning together, and iterating as a team. Not every project like Our Town can co-design larger pieces of work, but I'd encourage you to look for small opportunities to collaborate. In Our Town, it's woven into everything we do, but the sharpest example I wanted to share is our shared measurement framework. So we started in 2021 by developing a set of town-specific theories of change. We then, alongside community, rolled those into what we call a theme tree. So it's a visual that helps us to articulate shared outcomes across the 6 towns. From there, we built, and we're currently building and iterating, a shared set of rubrics. It sounds pretty straightforward, but along the way, we navigated hard questions, compromises, and differing priorities across the towns. When it came time to select our population level indicators, there was some, and rightfully so, some gentle pushback from community. Some felt it was a bit premature, that the indicators didn't quite fit the strength-based approach Our Town was trying to take. And that in fact, using population data might actually go against some of the things that Our Town stands for. So we paused. Instead of forcing a decision, we stayed curious and we leaned into other aspects of the framework. Now, again, not every project has the ability to hit pause like we did, but I'd invite you to think about and take stock of these things. Where can you compromise? Where might there be wiggle room to co-design? Where can you follow community's lead? And where can you come around the table and build something together? So to wrap up, create principles to ground your work and guide you through complexity. Use co-design as a tool to build trust and create better conditions for evaluation. No matter the time frame you're working in, I feel that these 2 things can help make evaluation a bit more meaningful, more ethical, and nudge us towards community-led.
Awesome, Melinda. That really rings true for me in my past experience as an evaluator in this space, particularly about the principles, because there's no constant known or the right way to do things in terms of the place-based approach itself, as well as the evaluation. Principles are so good, especially when they've been co-created, to be able to put as a lens over a situation, to be able to help read what that scenario is and what it might take, because there's no known answer sometimes. So principles, I found really important, and they can be easy to skip over, but worth putting the time in. The other thing, Melinda, is that it's good that you did acknowledge about the long-term funding that you've got, because that isn't the case for, a lot of place-based approaches. And even though, you know, we've got decades under our belt of doing this, there's still a bit of an expectations gap around how fast some stakeholders and partners think that we can move on this. And so attention is still around the time that it takes to do this relational work that Sharmay has talked about, and those relationships and centering, as well as, you know, to get some of those early changes ahead of those really long-term ones. Rodney, what are you thinking when you hear some of these tips, and what are you learning in this space?
Yeah, look, I'm really appreciated what Sharmay and Melinda have spoken about, and particularly Sharmay talking about community voice and the need to really elevate the voice of those who often don't get heard, and also be part of the design of the evaluation. So it's not being done to them, but it's something they're participating in. And I really appreciated what Melinda, the point she made about trust building. And I guess it goes to the heart of one of the tips that I want to share in terms of evaluation is that for evaluation of place-based approaches, it's not so much the evaluation of the programs or the activities, but for me, it's about the evaluation of the community-led aspect, which is the strength of the networks and the relationships, the trust that Melinda talked about, equity, inclusion, the evidence of collective leadership, and co-governance are all I think the elements that often evaluation misses because they want to go to the real meaty activity pieces. But it's actually what I think really stands out about place-based approaches is that really clear community-led community networks, the relationships, etc., that really become the foundation for the work. And so from an evaluation point of view, if I was going into a community, I'd be really wanting to explore the strength of those networks. You know, how many people are involved? What is, you know, how often do they work together? Are they just turning up to working group meetings once a month or whatever? Or is there something that's happening behind the scenes? There's a culture of collaboration that is evidenced almost on, you know, a really daily basis. And an example of that I can share from Burning Works was we had a working group of employment agencies. And when we first started meeting together, they could hardly make eye contact with one another because of the competition the competitive environment they used to work in. But over time, I started to notice that not only did they participate during the meetings, but you started to hear the conversations before and after the meetings where they were talking about working together to resolve client issues. And so that became a culture of collaboration that wasn't dependent on even myself or my team members, but it was something that was happening organically. So, yeah, looking for those really strong networks. The other one that I think is really important, and Ellise, you made the point about systems change, and that is exploring the relationship between the local place and the local community and the collective and the broader system, so that it's not just the community group in isolation, but how are they linking in to the broader ecosystems that in the work that they're doing. And a really good example I can give of that, it's a pretty simple one, but I think it goes to the heart of what was happening there. When I was working with the Kootalina Collective Connected Beginnings during the COVID response, they had there was a really close working relationship between community members, service providers, and government agencies. And once a week, we would get together and people would share about what was happening to them in terms of this COVID response. And it came out during one of the weekly sessions that a parent was saying, look, we'd asked for some rat tests for our family. And we were told that there was a bit of a shortage and they were being rationed. And on the call was a representative from the Tasmanian government who was coordinating the Tasmanian government response to COVID. And she said, oh no, look, that's not the case anymore. The government has now got heaps and heaps of rat tests. There shouldn't be any need to ration. There shouldn't be any shortages. And because she was working on a working group, she was able to take that to the working group, and a communication went out to all the schools in Tasmania to say, hey, we don't need to ration these tests. If families feel the need for them, feel free to give them out. A direct link between what was, families were experiencing in community right through to the government system of distributing the tests. And that's a really simple example, but Kitalina had built a really strong engagement with the Tasmanian government representatives across education, health, and Department of Communities. And so they had that opportunity to be able to link into the broader ecosystem. And that's one of the things I think is really powerful about place-based work when it's done really well. And it's something that as evaluators, it's really worth looking for to demonstrate the power of that.
Rodney, is there any other examples just generally of the types of changes that you saw in Bernie Works that were indications that you were nudging the systems and that there were some changes? So it might not have been for the cohorts that you're working in the long term for, but it's those things around you that are keeping it in place that might have been shifting. Can you give any examples of that, though, what those changes look like?
Yeah. Look, I think the most the greatest example of systems change were the ones where we were able to see government responding differently to community. And, the areas of shared decision making where there was an appetite from government to work alongside community, to work to get the voice of lived experience into decision making, that sort of sense of co-creation, co-production, and not just co-design. And so, over time, seeing the relationships of trust, that government was open to that sort of way of working, I think is probably the best illustration that I saw of really deep systems change that really sets up that sort of long-term results and long-term outcomes.
Oh, thanks, Rodney. Sharmay, I'll invite you back in. Is prompting more reflection on the type of work that you do, or what's standing out to you?
I think mainly just like acknowledging how challenging the environment can be to actually practice place-based evaluation, genuine place-based evaluation. And that time is obviously a really challenging component for us as evaluators in the space. But I really love all of the points that Rodney and Melinda shared as well, especially around the trust and like evaluating the community-led component as well as exploring the systems change. I think it's all really important.
Any other final thoughts? We're going to shift into questions soon, but it's an opportunity if you had any other thoughts, Melinda or Rodney. All right, well, let's shift gears then. Well, actually, just to sum up, one of the, in our title, we said 7 tips. So I reckon we might have done more than 7. I wasn't counting exactly, but I'm going to throw one more in just for measure. One theme that I'm hearing across this is about that learning culture and the emphasis on learning. So yeah, I reckon that is a tip. So even though the measuring and tracking progress and the evaluating is really important. Being able to have a shared learning experience for the different partners involved and being able to facilitate that in the short loops, so that week to week sort of stuff as well as along the loops, I think is also something that we see working and is present in some of those examples that you shared. Before I jump into questions, thanks folks for putting those in. I just wanted to flag that we've got two deep dive learning opportunities that folks might be interested in if they're interested in this type of material that we're covering. So the first one to let you know about is that Clear Horizon mid-March has got their Evaluating Place-Based Approaches course that is coming up, and we're really happy to extend the early bird discount to folks attending the webinar today. So we'll send you a link out for that so you could get access to that discount. That course covers everything from the principles and how to do the design for evaluating place-based approaches, and also the tools, some of the technical tools that are systems aware and work well in these spaces. And then the second deep dive opportunity is that Kowa and Clear Horizon run a face-to-face course a couple of times a year, and so there's still availability for the August and November courses, and that's the Two Worlds UML course, so Understanding, Measurement, Evaluation and Learning. And that course would be of benefit for organisations that are wanting to centre First Nations approaches and also look at that integration between First Nations and non-First Nations approaches when we're doing UML in this space. We'll send you more links and details about that, and be on our website as well. Alrighty, so let's have a look at what's coming in. So we've got one which I'll see who's interested in answering this one. We'll try and keep them concise so we can get through a few. At what point do traditional MEL techniques transition or evolve into the unique approaches specifically tailored for place-based initiatives? What are some of the examples of those unique approaches? Melinda, is this one that you're happy to jump into?
Sure. I feel like many approaches we take in our town are inspired by more traditional approaches. So I would say, like, a couple examples I can think of is a couple of towns are doing what they call stories of change, which are deeply inspired by most significant learning or most significant change technique. We're doing a round of case studies that are inspired by SIPSI, so measuring systems change technique. So yeah, I think I'm not sure if there's like a point at which something switches into something else, but I think we're constantly being inspired and pulling from the toolkit to iterate and adapt to make sense for community, which goes back to that co-design and co-development piece, right? I wanted to just add something when we wrapped up that first conversation and we were talking about the importance of also measuring a community-led approach. Just want to name that something that's been really helpful in our town is the Tamarack Institute's community-led spectrum, which is a bit of a rubric, and using that as a way to kind of foreground conversations about community-led to make decisions. We almost use it like a principle in practice, but it can be great for evaluation.
And building on that, we've got a question or two, and Rodney, you might want to jump into this one, about sharing any insights or recommendations of ways to measure, or tools for measuring collaboration and partnership elements. So for instance, you know, strength of relationships important. How did you track how you were going as a collaboration?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, there's quite a few tools around measuring the health of collaborations that are about. So they're really helpful in terms of understanding how strong the networks are, how strong the relationships are, how strong the collaboration is. So any of those sort of tools are really helpful. in terms of measuring that sort of that's part of the work. It's social network analysis can be a really great tool if it's used really well, because it can. One thing that I really like about it is that it can graphically show the strength of the relationships and the collaboration. So, you know, anything in that area can be really helpful as well.
All right. Sharmay, you might want to jump into this one. We've got a question about any recommendations for how you set up place-based, also with that systems lens, that monitoring and involvement from community from the beginning phase.
Mhm.
Any
So-
recommendations for how you walk on the journey from the beginning?
So at Kowa, it's really embedded in our practice. So before we start any project, we have, I guess, your standard inception meeting with the client, but we also have a meeting. The preference is obviously face-to-face, but if needed, online. But a meeting with, say, local community members, people who may have accessed the program or initiative that's being evaluated, other service providers. So anyone kind of in and around the program in question. So we engage them from the beginning. And it's really just like an informal meeting, kind of introduce ourselves, introduce the project, and then also the methodology. Yeah, kind of just discussing everything in a free, relaxed manner. And I guess it kind of, from the beginning there, it helps us or gives them an opportunity, sorry, to let us know if our approach is maybe not the most appropriate and where we can kind of adjust to make sure that we are meeting community needs. And then we kind of just have regular touch points with them. So whether that be through like certain phases or, as I kind of mentioned in my top tips, through particular deliverables or key deliverables as well. Yeah, and that extends through the whole life of the project.
I think that what you mentioned before, Sharmay, about how you've got the U in UML, so the understanding piece, that can be really valuable in being able to take snapshots of, you know, what the systems might be looking like, what's happening in community, what's happening in partnerships. You can sort of turn your attention to lots of different places, but just to explicitly value that you're trying to understand things. And the tricky bit is with systems transformation and change is that it's dynamic. It's changing all the time. It may or may not be as a result of the work that you're doing. And so sometimes it's not about evaluating the whole way that it's changing, but to be able to create an understanding as best as you can about what are the changes happening, why are those changes happening, and then, I mean, for your own evaluation frameworks, you know, then you can get into the contribution that you're making. But yeah, I just guess I'm just drawing attention to that understanding piece, which is also an important part of that process.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to that, I think that then falls back into the L in MEL, the learning component, because I guess when you're understanding, it's one thing to understand, but the learnings that you take away from that to then apply are also really important.
All right, I'm jumping around a little bit in the questions. So there's one person curious to hear about if you've got experience with the sort of pay to participate approach or model, or ways to acknowledge and honour the labour and the contribution, the time, the expertise for community and partners to put in, because not everyone's covered by a salary when they're participating in this. Any examples or thoughts on that?
I'm happy to quickly jump in. So I think, yeah, first of all, great to acknowledge that often we do expect, I guess, contribution and participation from individuals, and quite often it can be a lot without there being any acknowledgement or reimbursement for their time. I think it's also important to acknowledge that as Aboriginal people, we also we tend to wear a lot of different hats, and it's probably for a lot of people as well, but we wear a lot of different hats. So even though we may be participating as part of our professional position, we also bring that home and lived experience component as well. So I think it's really important to recognise that and reimburse people for their time.
So we're also, there's a few questions that come back to the tools about how you monitor and identify those, you know, sometimes called intangible changes, or the hard to spot changes in the system. So we mentioned the significant instances of systems change and impact, the SIPSI tool. Just wanted to flag that there are a lot of tools in the place-based evaluation framework and toolkit, which is free and publicly available. I think there might be over 80 tools of systems aware tools in that resource. So we'll also share a link to that in our follow-up email. Melinda, do you have any other advice for the messy middle?
We're in it at the moment in our town. A few things I would suggest, and I also just want to, there's a question up there around principles in evaluation. These two things connect, so I'll start with that one. And I'm glad it's asked, because it's also essential, using our principles not just to ground our practice, but as a kind of central part of our evaluation as well in our town. So just naming a couple of the ways that we use it in practice is both in our long loop of learning. So every year we come together and we do what we call a TOC Christmas tree, but our principles are there as well. And so that's an exercise where alongside community, we're tagging data and evidence against particular outcomes in our theory of change, but also against our principles. So if there was a particular principle that really enabled this change to happen, we're tagging data and evidence against it. So that's one way that we use our principles in evaluation. And then the other way is in a bit of a, every year or so, we do a bit of a self-assessment or self-reflection where everyone is asked to reflect on how they showed up in their principles that year, how their team showed up, and then particularly how the support team showed up against our principles that year. So that's in practice. In terms of that messy middle piece, the way that we've done it, or we're doing it in our town, is twofold at the moment. I mentioned when I was sharing my tips about our rubrics. So this year we're really leaning into not just the what we're measuring in our town. So the towns have a set of shared outcomes that they measure against, but also how change is playing out. So we've got, I think, 3 years of evidence now that have helped us to develop a pretty high level set of rubrics that outline 4 ways that we see change unfolding in our town. And then every year we come around those, similar to TOC Christmas tree, and tag evidence and data against that to let us know whether we're on the right track or not. This year's our midterm evaluation, so we're going to be doing a series of case studies to help us understand that contribution a bit more. But I think it's going back to Sharmay's first point, which is around being in place. And that really the best way to understand contribution or to understand some of these ripples is to either yourself be in place, to make the time to have those conversations, to kind of put the dots together, or a true community-led approach to have folks from community who are themselves unpacking and exploring that contribution and understanding the relationship alongside you. So I think there's a nice connection back to the way we understand system shifts and these ripples is to ourselves be in place.
All right, I've got my eye on the clock. I think we're almost at time. There's a question or two around storytelling and the importance of that, which it does play a really important role. And there's various tools. There's the yarning tool that Kowa's got, Clear Horizons got most significant change, free resources and templates, and also courses that can help build up with that. And then there's other systems aware story approaches as well. I think we might even do a session on that. And, you know, the point was attribution is always a tricky thing. How might we better use stories through Mel? So yeah, we might dive into that in its own session. I'm sorry that we didn't get to that one today. Thank you so much, guests, for being with us and for sharing your practices and the tips. As we move into 2025, there is no greater time for us all to keep leaning into improving our practice in this work and enjoying the work as well by learning from others. So thanks for coming along, and thanks everyone for attending today. We'll send you a follow-up email with some links and resources. Our next session is on the 27th of March, and that is what's in your Mel toolkit. So there'll be more tool discussion then. All right, have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining. Bye.